The moment that cage burst open, chaos tore through the air like a gunshot. A massive German shepherd, a police K9, lunged out, eyes burning, teeth bared, and for one terrifying second, everyone thought they were staring at a killer. Officers screamed for people to run, but one man didn't move. An old veteran stood still, cane in hand, rain soaking through his jacket, and whispered a single name that froze the storm itself. Shadow. No one understood why that word made the dog stop, or why its growl turned into something almost human, a sound of grief. What happened next would reveal a secret the department buried for over a decade. A truth about loyalty, loss, and the one bond that death couldn't break. So stay with me for the next minute, because what began as a manhunt became a miracle. If you still believe that love and memory can outlive even death, join us by subscribing to Healing with Max and tell me, how did that opening make you feel? I wish you a peaceful day, wherever you're watching from. The dawn broke gray over the outskirts of Helena, Montana, the kind of colorless morning that makes even the streetlights hesitate before turning off. Wind pressed through the valley in slow, uneasy breaths, carrying with it the distant smell of rain and iron. Somewhere beyond the pine line, thunder murmured like a memory that had never really left. The K9 training facility sat on the edge of that storm, a grid of steel fences and concrete paths, slick with dew and discipline. The world there did not wake gently. It clanged to life. Trainers moved briskly across the yard, their boots striking the wet ground in unison. Whistles cut through the air, radios crackled, and the metallic rhythm of cages opening and shutting became the morning's heartbeat. Inside one of those cages, a German shepherd named Max paced endlessly, his golden-tinted fur damp from the mist, his amber eyes flicking between the shadows and the light. He was 5 years old, strong and sleek, his movements sharp yet restless, as if something inside him refused to quiet. He had once been the pride of the unit, fearless, obedient, and almost eerily intelligent. His handler, Officer Nathan Briggs, a man in his mid-30s with dark stubble and weary blue eyes, often said Max didn't just follow orders, he understood them. Nathan had the kind of posture that belonged to someone who still lived by the book long after the book had closed. He wore his uniform like a promise, the kind that's both heavy and sacred. But lately, even he had noticed the change. Every time the gunfire simulator went off, Max froze. Not from fear, but from focus. His ears pricked toward the far end of the compound, where the wire fence met the edge of the pine forest. Beyond those trees lay nothing but mist and silence, yet Max stared as if hearing something no one else could. Nathan had laughed it off at first, calling it ghost instinct. But that morning, when the storm clouds thickened and the air grew heavy enough to taste, something in his gut told him this wasn't just instinct. "Ready for the thunder drill!" someone shouted across the yard. Officers took their positions, loading blank rounds into rifles. The echo of metal carried through the compound, sharp as lightning before it strikes. Nathan reached down, fastening Max's collar, whispering low, "Steady, boy. You're all right." But the shepherd's muscles were tight as cables, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the trembling horizon. Then came the first crack. The thunder simulator roared, a string of echoing blanks ricocheting off the concrete walls. Max's body stiffened, ears slicing through the air like radar. A growl began deep in his chest, rumbling through the cage bars. Nathan pulled on the leash, voice firm but calm. "Heel!" But the next blast came faster, closer. The metallic walls vibrated, a sound that struck like a memory rather than a noise. Max lunged. His claws scraped the steel floor. His bark turned feral, primal, more pain than rage. "Hold him down!" Nathan shouted. Two nearby officers rushed to help, but Max was stronger, his power like something unchained. The cage rattled under his weight, bolts screaming against the hinges. The rain started to fall, light at first, tapping on the tin roof like fingers on a coffin. And then, a mistake. At the far end of the yard, a young recruit, barely 20, still fumbling with his gloves, dropped a metal tray. The sound clanged, sharp and final, echoing through the corridor like a gunshot in a church. That was all it took. Max snapped. He hurled his shoulder into the door, once, twice. The third impact broke the hinge clean. The gate burst open. For a single heartbeat, the world stopped breathing. The rain, the wind, the men, everything froze in disbelief. Then the alarm shattered the silence. "K9 Max has escaped! All units alert!" Radios screamed, boots thundered against the ground, and Nathan's voice roared over it all. "Stop him! Don't shoot!" But Max was already gone, a streak of muscle and motion cutting through the gray. He vaulted the outer fence, sparks flying from the live wires as he disappeared into the storm. The wind swallowed the sound of pursuit. Nathan stood in the rain, gasping, watching the gate swing open and closed, as if the moment itself refused to settle. His heart pounded not from fear, but from a feeling he hadn't known in years. It wasn't rebellion, it was purpose. Max hadn't run away. He had run towards something. By the time the officers regrouped, Max had already crossed the far fields and vanished into the pines. The rain came harder, blurring his tracks into ghost prints. A dispatch crackled through the speaker. "All units be advised. K9 Max, male German Shepherd, last seen heading north toward downtown. Dog may respond aggressively if provoked." Miles away, the city was waking under a dull sheet of rain. Traffic lights blinked red against wet pavement, storefronts flickered to life, and thunder rolled over the rooftops like a warning no one could name. On the second floor of a weathered building above an old diner, Raymond Cole stirred from uneasy sleep. His body tensed before his mind caught up. The veteran's apartment was simple, framed medals on one wall, a worn coat draped over a chair, and a single photograph of a black and tan German shepherd sitting beside a younger man in uniform. The name engraved beneath the frame read, "Shadow." Raymond sat up slowly, breathing through the dull ache in his chest. His hair, streaked with gray, clung to his forehead, damp with sweat. Outside his window, lightning illuminated the empty street below, the diner's neon sign flickering through the rain. The storm was louder now, closer. He reached for the photograph, tracing the dog's face with a trembling hand. For years he had avoided the sound of thunder, the smell of wet earth, the way it pulled memories out of hiding. But that morning, as another low rumble rolled across the sky, he felt it again, that tug deep in the chest, familiar and heavy, as if someone were calling his name from a distance too far to measure. He whispered it before realizing why. Shadow. The word hung in the air like incense, soft and lingering. Somewhere across town, through rain and radio static, a German shepherd broke through the tree line, his paws striking mud, his breath sharp in the cold air. Lightning flashed, catching the glint of his collar. The tag swung once, briefly visible before the darkness swallowed it again. Max, Unit 07. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. Only the sound of the storm followed him, rolling like a memory returning from another lifetime. The city woke in fear. By mid-morning, the streets were half empty, and every television screen carried the same red banner. Police K9 on the loose. Dangerous, unstable, avoid contact. The words pulsed like a heartbeat across diners, storefronts, and waiting rooms. Metal shutters clanged down. Parents pulled their children from playgrounds. The usual hum of life had been replaced by sirens and the metallic taste of panic. Rain drizzled through the gray air, blurring reflections on the pavement. At the edge of Riverside Park, Raymond Cole stood alone, one hand resting on his cane, the other tucked into his coat pocket. His face was calm but distant, as if the noise of the city didn't quite reach him. The drizzle soaked through his hair, yet he didn't move. Somewhere inside him, the world had gone very still, like it used to before a firefight. Down the avenue, the first siren cut through the air, long, rising, desperate, and beneath it came another sound, sharper, closer, the staccato rhythm of claws striking wet asphalt. The officers shouted commands, but the words blurred into the rain. Out of the mist, Max appeared, larger than memory, fur darkened by water, chest heaving, eyes locked ahead. Every muscle in his body moved with purpose, but not rage. He wasn't running from something. He was running toward it. His paws splashed through puddles as he crossed the intersection, a streak of life against the concrete gray. A pair of patrol cars screeched to a halt. Officers jumped out, one with a tranquilizer rifle, another shouting through a megaphone, "Stop that animal before someone gets hurt!" But Max was already gone, a blur crossing into the park. Screams erupted. A stroller tipped over, wheels spinning in the mud. A woman cried out, reaching helplessly as her little girl, no more than 4 years old, fell face first onto the wet path. People scattered, umbrellas snapping open like frightened wings, and through it all, Max veered sharply toward the child. For a moment, everyone thought the same thing, that the beast was about to strike. A collective gasp filled the air. But Max slowed, paws skidding slightly on the slick concrete. He lowered his head, sniffing the child gently. The girl whimpered, frozen with fear. Then, with surprising tenderness, the shepherd nudged her shoulder, pushing her toward the woman who had fallen to her knees. The mother sobbed, scooping her daughter into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom she was speaking, to God or to the creature watching her from the rain. Max stood motionless for a heartbeat. Water dripped from his muzzle, his ears flicking at the sound of shouting officers approaching behind him. Then his gaze shifted, drawn to something else, something quiet, something known. Across the open field, Raymond stood beneath the old iron gate of the park, his silhouette steady against the mist. The two locked eyes across the rain. Max's ears flattened, his body low and tense, tail rigid. A growl rippled from his throat, low and uncertain. But the old man didn't move. He took a slow breath, lifted his chin slightly, and said, his voice barely louder than the rain, "Easy, boy!" The words floated through the distance, fragile yet familiar. Max froze, the growl faltered, his head tilted, eyes flickering between suspicion and recognition. The storm pressed down, the air thick enough to feel. Behind Max, officers moved into position. One of them, a young cop, soaked to the bone, hands trembling, lifted his weapon. "I've got a shot," he shouted. Raymond's heart lurched. He took a step forward, cane sinking into the mud. His voice cut through the chaos, steady, commanding in a way only soldiers and fathers could manage. Don't. The officer hesitated. Rain streaked down his helmet. Sir, get back. But Raymond's tone softened, almost pleading. He's not angry. He's lost. For a moment, the world seemed to forget how to breathe. Max stood still, chest rising and falling. The storm hissed against the trees. His eyes, once fierce, now uncertain, found Raymond's and held them. Something long buried flickered inside, a memory that didn't belong to this life but to another. Slowly, cautiously, Max took one step forward, then another. Water rippled beneath his paws. His breathing steadied. The growl had vanished. The officers tensed, fingers near triggers. Raymond didn't move. He let the rain soak through his coat, through his bones, through the years that separated him from the dog in front of him. Max stopped just inches away. The air between them trembled, part storm, part memory. Raymond lowered his hand, open and waiting, the way a man might when greeting an old friend he's not sure is real. The thunder rolled again, long and low, as if the sky itself was remembering. And in that moment, neither man nor beast moved, caught between fear and recognition, loss and return, two souls adrift in the same storm that had never truly ended. The rain fell harder now, washing color and shape into one trembling blur. The park no longer looked real, just ripples of gray, blue, and silver melting together like a watercolor bleeding into itself. Voices echoed in fragments. Radios crackled. Boots splashed through mud. But at the center of it all, Max stood still, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. His gaze was locked on Raymond, unblinking, searching. Something ancient and buried deep within him began to stir, faint at first, like the flicker of an ember struggling against the wind. The air between man and dog throbbed with tension. Raymond's shoulders trembled under the weight of the storm, his hand still half raised, his lips slightly parted as if afraid to breathe. He could see it, the confusion in Max's eyes, the tug-of-war between instinct and memory, between a command and a calling. Then, for the briefest instant, something shifted behind those amber eyes. The rain dimmed. The sound of the world began to fade. Flashback, Afghanistan, 2009. The desert sun was merciless. The air shimmered with heat and smoke, carrying the bitter tang of gunpowder. Sergeant Raymond Cole, 30 years old, strong, steady, his uniform covered in dust, crouched behind a crumbling wall. His arm bled through the sleeve, but his voice never wavered. Beside him, his partner moved with the discipline of a soldier and the heart of something purer. Shadow, a black and tan German shepherd with sharp eyes and a calm intensity that mirrored his handler's own. "Find the wounded!" Raymond shouted, pointing toward the collapsed alley where cries for help echoed through the chaos. Shadow didn't hesitate. He bounded into the smoke, tail high, nose down, weaving through the ruins. Bullets cracked against metal. Sand exploded into clouds. Then came the sound that would never leave Raymond's mind. A single gunshot. Close. Final. "Shadow?" Raymond's voice broke through the roar. He ran toward the noise, slipping on gravel, breath burning in his lungs. The world narrowed to a single shape lying on the ground. Shadow, chest heaving, eyes wide and glassy. Raymond dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as they found the slick warmth of blood beneath the fur. "Stay with me," he whispered, voice cracking between command and plea. Shadow's tail thumped once against the dirt, a slow, loyal rhythm. Then it fell still. The silence that followed was unbearable. The world continued to burn around him, explosions, shouting, fire, but Raymond could only hear his own heartbeat, the one that suddenly felt borrowed. He pressed his forehead against shadows, whispering promises that never made it past the smoke. Back to the present, the park, now blurred by rain. Max blinked, his body trembling. The memory wasn't his, and yet it pulsed inside him as if it were carved into his bones. The sound of the gunfire, the voice shouting, "Go, boy!" The weight of that final silence. It all lived within him like an echo he had been carrying since birth. His chest rose sharply. He looked at Raymond again. Raymond saw it too. The same tilt of the head, the same quiet patience before movement. And when Max's ears flattened, Raymond felt his breath hitch, the words escaping him before he could stop them. "You have his eyes." The words cut through the rain like a prayer. Max lowered his head, his tail still, his gaze softening into something that wasn't fear or aggression, but recognition. For the first time, he didn't look like a runaway dog. He looked like someone finding their way home. But the world didn't pause for miracles. The officers, soaked and shivering, began to close the perimeter. Their radios hissed with static. "Target in sight," one barked. "Proceed with caution." Boots shifted, triggers tightened. The storm swallowed their words and turned them into whispers of thunder. Raymond took a slow step forward, palm still open. "Don't," he murmured again, eyes locked on Max. He remembers. But the rain made it hard to hear, and panic made it impossible to listen. Then it happened. Small, fast, catastrophic. One officer, slipping in the mud, lost his balance. The muzzle of his rifle struck the ground, discharging a single round into the chaos. The sound ripped through the air, sharp and merciless, a ghost of that same gunshot from so many years ago. Raymond flinched. Max froze. Then instinct took over. The shepherd spun around, barking loud and fierce, teeth bared, not at the men, but at the bullet that had already left the barrel. Time fractured. Raymond stumbled backward, and in one fluid, desperate motion, Max lunged. The shot tore through the rain with a scream of steel, but when it hit, it met fur instead of flesh. Gasps exploded across the park. Raymond fell, mud splattering his coat. For a heartbeat, he thought the world had gone silent again. But then he saw the dog standing between him and the line of officers, growling low, chest rising and falling, unharmed but defiant. The bullet had missed, slicing only through the fabric of Raymond's sleeve. The young officer dropped his weapon, horror etched across his face. Others froze, uncertain whether to advance or kneel. And there, in the flashing red-blue of the sirens, stood the dog everyone had feared. A creature labeled dangerous, unstable, shielding an old soldier like a guardian. Raymond slowly reached up, fingers brushing against the wet fur at Max's neck. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but every soul within earshot felt it. "Good boy." Max exhaled, shivering. His ears twitched, his breathing slowing. Somewhere deep within that loyal heart, something ancient finally found peace. The sirens spun faster, painting their faces in red and blue. Rain hissed down around them, washing away fear, orders, and years of misunderstanding. And in the fading chaos, as the officers stood frozen and the crowd watched in stunned silence, one truth shimmered through the storm. Sometimes loyalty doesn't die. It just waits for the right moment to be seen again. The sirens hadn't stopped. Blue and red lights flickered across the drenched park, painting every raindrop in trembling color. Officers spread out in a cautious semicircle, boots sinking into mud, rifles steady but hands shaking. Through the blur of storm and noise, one scene refused to move. An old man and a soaked German shepherd standing side by side, both silent, both unafraid. Max's chest rose and fell like a bellows. His fur darkened to bronze beneath the rain. His eyes darted from the circling police to the man beside him, Raymond Cole, whose gray coat clung to his shoulders like a flag of surrender. Between them, no words passed. There didn't need to be any. "Max, stand down!" Officer Nathan Briggs's voice split the rain, raw and panicked. He pushed through the line, rain running down his temples. His K-9 division badge gleamed faintly beneath a rip in his sleeve. His eyes weren't those of an officer anymore. They were those of a man seeing a ghost. Max's ears twitched. He turned toward the sound, but didn't move. His stance was neither attack nor retreat. It was the kind of stillness born from memory. "Sir, step away from the animal!" a young officer yelled, voice breaking between courage and fear. The crowd echoed the tension. Umbrellas trembling, phones recording, breath caught. But Raymond didn't step away. His hand trembled only slightly as he reached into his coat. "Easy," he murmured. Half to Max, half to the ghosts listening beyond the storm. Guns rose instantly. The metallic clicks cut through the air like a countdown. Nathan shouted again, "Don't move! Sir, drop whatever you're holding!" Raymond's hand emerged slowly, holding not a weapon but a memory. The cracked leather collar sagged between his fingers, the metal tag catching a flash of lightning. Shadow. Everything stopped. Even the storm seemed to hesitate. Max froze. His nose lifted. The world funneled into one sound, the faint jingle of the tag, the ghost of another life. He stepped closer, nostrils flaring, breath shallow. One sniff, then another. The distance between the past and present dissolved. A sound rose from deep inside his chest. Not a bark, not a growl, a cry. A soft, breaking whine that didn't belong to this world. Nathan's gun lowered. The others followed. Somewhere, a camera phone trembled. Someone whispered, "Dear God." Raymond's eyes glistened through the rain. "He remembers his father," he whispered. Max leaned in, pressing his head against the old man's knee. Raymond's hand found his neck and lingered there, shaking. The years of silence, the guilt, the loss, all of it poured out through the rain that refused to stop falling. Nathan took a slow step forward, removing his cap, bowing his head, not as a cop, but as a man. What happens now?" he murmured, barely audible. No one answered. The park had gone still, as if afraid to disturb the peace just to rediscovered. The rain softened to a whisper, sliding over the collar still in Raymond's palm. Shadow. The letters gleamed faintly, the way names do when they're finally spoken aloud again. Then, a sound. Not thunder this time. Not rain. Something sharper, mechanical. From the far edge of the park, a black van rolled through the barricade, headlights cutting across the mud. The markings on the door, Federal Canine Recovery Unit, shone like steel. Two figures stepped out in black raincoats, faces hidden under the hoods. One of them called through a loudspeaker, "Stand back! That animal is government property! We're taking him!" The crowd gasped. Nathan's expression hardened. "No, you're not," he said under his breath. Raymond looked up, the collar still clenched in his hand. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. He'd seen that insignia before, years ago, on the men who'd taken Shadow away for his final mission. Lightning flashed. Max lifted his head and growled, deep and low, like an echo from another lifetime. Weeks passed, and the story spread like a heartbeat, carried through every television, phone, and whisper in the rain. Escaped police dog reunites with veteran trainer. Those words painted walls, filled headlines, and divided the nation in two. Some called it a miracle. Others called it negligence. To some, Max was a hero. To others, he was still a loaded weapon waiting to fire. Inside the precinct, time felt heavier than law. Officer Nathan Briggs stood before the review board, his uniform freshly pressed, but his eyes weary. The room was windowless, the air thick with authority and damp paper. Across the long oak table sat Chief Harold Monroe, a man in his 60s with silver hair, a polished badge, and the kind of voice that could flatten a man's conviction. "He's not dangerous," Nathan said, jaw clenched, voice steady but low. "He's loyal." The chief exhaled through his nose, fingers tapping the table once. "Loyalty doesn't erase protocol, Officer Briggs. That animal disobeyed a command, endangered civilians, and attacked property belonging to the state." Nathan's knuckles whitened. He wanted to shout, but years in uniform had taught him restraint. "He saved lives," he said instead. "Twice." The chief's gaze softened, but only slightly. "And now the city wants to know if they can trust him again." He paused, closing the folder in front of him. "Or if we made a mistake ever letting him live." Outside, the sky hung gray and low, pressing against the courthouse across the street. On the steps sat Raymond Cole, coat buttoned to his throat, a small oxygen tank resting beside him. His health had faded in the weeks since the park incident, but he came every day, waiting quietly for the hearing's end. His breath fogged in the cold, but his eyes stayed sharp, watching the door as if faith alone could bring good news through it. Then, chaos. A shrill alarm split the air. Across the street, smoke poured from a courthouse window. Flames licked the second floor like orange tongues tasting the wind. Someone screamed, a woman's voice. "My child! He's still inside!" For a moment, the world froze. Then everything moved at once. Officers scattered, radios crackling, firefighters still blocks away. Nathan spun toward the sound, just as a streak of brown and gold bolted past him. "Max!" The shepherd lunged through the courthouse doors before anyone could react. His paws hit marble, claws scraping as smoke swallowed him whole. Nathan cursed under his breath and ran after, the fire alarm wailing like a warning from heaven. Inside was a hell of heat and shadow. Ceiling tiles fell. The air shimmered. "Max!" Nathan coughed, waving through the haze. His flashlight beam caught glimpses, scorched walls, collapsed chairs, and finally, movement. A small boy, maybe 6, crouched behind a desk, tears streaking through soot. Max was already there. The dog nudged the child's shoulder, barking, twice, sharp, commanding, alive. He pushed against the boy's side until the child crawled toward the window, hacking and crying. Nathan's throat burned as he climbed over debris, yelling for backup. "Over here!" He smashed the window latch, air rushing in like salvation. Firefighters outside shouted as the boy appeared in the smoke, guided by the shepherd's muzzle. "Got him! We see him!" Strong hands pulled the boy through. Applause, shouts, relief, then another sound. A thud. Nathan turned. Max lay on the ground, chest heaving, soot blackening his fur. His eyes blinked slowly, tail twitching once. Nathan dropped beside him, cradling the dog's head. "Easy, boy. Stay with me." When they emerged, the world met them with a roar of rain and flashing lights. The boy was safe, crying in his mother's arms. Reporters were already arriving, cameras gleaming like eyes hungry for truth. Nathan carried Max through the crowd, his uniform streaked with ash. his arms trembling under the weight of something holy. By nightfall, the headlines returned, different this time. The same dog once feared saves another life. Days later, under the golden glow of chandeliers in the Police Hall of Honor, the story found its peace. The hall was filled with uniforms, applause, and something heavier, redemption. Max stood tall beside Nathan, his fur cleaned but a faint burn mark still visible near his shoulder. A medal hung around his neck, the Medal of Valor. Beside him, Raymond Cole leaned on his cane, frail but smiling. The chief shook his hand and said softly, "For courage that outlived command." Raymond took the microphone, his voice thin but sure. "He's more than a hero," he said. "He's a promise kept." Then he turned to Max, eyes glistening. "You did it, Shadows boy. You found your way back." Applause rose like thunder, echoing through the hall. Cameras flashed. The medal gleamed beside the old collar resting in Raymond's hand, one shining, one worn, both telling the same story. Winter came quietly, like a visitor who knew how to knock softly. Snow fell outside the city hospital, each flake drifting past the window in slow, graceful spirals. Inside, the air was warm but still. Machines hummed low, steady as heartbeats that hadn't yet learned to stop. On the bed, Raymond Cole lay surrounded by the hush of white walls and morning light. His breathing was shallow, his frame smaller now, bones pressing gently against the sheets. But there was peace in his expression, the kind that comes when the weight of years finally sets itself down. Beside him, Max sat perfectly still, his body curled just enough for his head to rest on the blanket near Raymond's hand. The nurses said he hadn't moved all night. Every so often the dog's chest rose with a quiet sigh, the rhythm slow, faithful. A nurse peeked in, a woman in her 30s, dark hair tied neatly, eyes soft with reverence. She whispered to another by the door, "He's been there since yesterday. Didn't even eat." Raymond's eyelids fluttered open, pale blue catching the light. His fingers, fragile but steady, found the thick fur at his side. He smiled faintly. "Still here, huh?" Max's tail thumped once against the bed, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat answering another. Raymond's smile deepened, though his breathing grew shallower. His thumb traced the edge of the dog's collar, the one that gleamed beside the old, cracked leather tag he still kept nearby. For a while, nothing moved. The room was filled only with the sound of air and memory. Then the monitor by the bed softened into a single, long note, one that neither startled nor frightened. It was the kind of silence that didn't take something away, but rather gave something back. Max didn't move. He simply pressed his head closer against the man's still hand, closing his eyes as the snow outside thickened, turning the morning world into something pure and quiet again. When the nurses came in, they found Raymond gone, and the shepherd waiting, patient, dignified, as though guarding a post only he understood. Someone whispered, "He's not leaving him, is he?" Another answered, "He never will." A year passed. The same park, now dressed in autumn gold, stretched wide under a low sun. Nathan Briggs walked slowly down the path, hands in his coat pockets, the air crisp and sweet with fallen leaves. Beside him trotted Max, older now, muzzle graying, movements slower but still steady. The metal around his neck glimmered faintly, catching the last warmth of the day. They stopped near a new bronze bench placed beneath the oak trees. On its plaque, the engraved words read, "Raymond Cole, a man who taught hearts to obey." Nathan stood in silence for a moment, eyes tracing the letters. He sat down, exhaling, and Max settled beside him, tail brushing the ground. In the distance, children's laughter drifted across the open grass. Little girl, maybe 5, with blonde curls and a red coat, broke away from her friends. She hesitated, then approached, holding out a mittened hand. "Can I pet him?" she asked softly. Nathan smiled. "Go ahead." Max lifted his head, sniffed the air, then leaned forward. His nose brushed her palm, followed by a gentle lick. The girl giggled, the sound light and bright as chimes in winter air. Nathan couldn't help but smile. "He's gentle," he said quietly, watching them, "because someone once taught him to be." The girl waved and ran back toward the playground. The park glowed gold and silver as the sun began to fall behind the trees. Nathan rose, giving the bench one last glance, and started walking down the path. Max paused. He looked back, toward the bench, toward the fading light, toward something unseen. The wind picked up, scattering leaves that shimmered like small embers before they fell. And in that whisper of wind, Nathan could have sworn he heard it. The voice of the old soldier, calm, steady, eternal. Some bonds never fade. They just change form and find their way home again. Nathan turned, but there was only wind and light. Max began walking again, the metal around his neck catching the last rays of the setting sun. The park glowed behind them, a place now filled with peace, memory, and the quiet echo of loyalty that refused to die. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They linger, softly, like footprints in fresh snow, or the echo of a name whispered long after the wind has gone. What we've witnessed isn't about glory or medals or the weight of a uniform. It's about the small, unseen moments that hold the world together. A steady hand, a loyal companion, a quiet promise kept when no one is watching. Loyalty doesn't ask for reward. Courage doesn't shout to be heard. And kindness, it often walks beside us in silence, reminding us that strength isn't always about how loud we fight, but how deeply we love. Somewhere out there, men and women still keep watch through the night. And sometimes, so do their four-legged shadows. They stand guard not because they have to, but because something inside them remembers what's worth protecting. So tonight, when the world feels heavy, think of them. The silent hearts, the faithful eyes, the ones who never stop believing that goodness still matters. Because in the end, true heroism doesn't fade. It simply finds another shape and keeps walking quietly beside us.